Okay, we're going to wait a couple minutes yet. Good evening for those of you who are on Zoom. We're going to wait a couple minutes. We're still missing one member of council. And as soon as he gets here, we'll get started. Did you see where the Christmas caroling on the square was canceled, on the circle was canceled?
No, why?
The weather.
Tonight?
Yeah.
The weather.
Beautiful?
It's getting pretty windy.
It's getting windy and they're expecting rain. It's rain and nasty weather between now and 9 o'clock. Are you on your way? Okay, thank you. Tim's on his way, so we'll wait a couple minutes.
Did he say he's coming?
He said he'd be there as quickly as he could.
We don't need to wait for Glenn to start, do we?
No, we're not going to wait for Glenn. But we can.
Was anyone from DENREC going to join?
No, they submitted comments. So there's one, and I can go through that when I give an overview of the ordinance.
Yeah, she. No more 64-degree weather. Okay. Sorry to keep everyone waiting. Give it a couple more minutes, and if Tim isn't here, we'll go ahead and get started without him. Sounds like Tim's here. That's my read of it. I apologize.
Walking without my mask too.
Okay,
It's one of those days.
all right.
It's just us.
Okay, so, good evening. It is now 6:08, and we are here for a public hearing on December the 6th. The public hearing is in reference to an ordinance, a possibility to amend Article 9 of Chapter 197, zoning of the Municipal Code of the City of Lewes, Delaware, Section 19775, relating to source water protection overlay. I believe we've discussed this before. I know we had a lot of interest in this topic, and there's been a considerable amount of work done by Janelle Cornwell, our city planner, and Anne Marie in conjunction with discussing this draft, I believe, with DENREC. And Anne Marie Janelle is on vacation this week, so she's not with us this evening, but Anne Marie is going to provide an overview of DENREC's comments. Anne Marie, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, so I'll kind of start with how we got here so that everybody understands the context of the changes to the ordinance. The state of Delaware adopted a piece of legislation back in, I think, 2005 that requires municipalities with population over 2,000 to identify, using data provided by DENREC, within the comprehensive plan, areas that are excellent recharge potential areas and wellhead protection areas. So again, these areas are mapped by DENREC. We're required to show them in the comprehensive plan, and we are required to develop zoning overlays to protect these areas, and so that the aquifers can be recharged, and so that we do not have issues of contamination within the wells. So in 2008, the city adopted its source water protection overlay. They used a model ordinance provided by DENREC, and it was adopted and put into the zoning ordinance, and it was never implemented. And in that ordinance, it requires that within the excellent recharge potential area, we don't actually have any wellhead protection areas within the city. The city's wells and the and the protection area around the city's wells are in unincorporated Sussex County. But the requirement was that within the excellent recharge area, that lots could not exceed 20% impervious cover. So it was not, as I said, it was adopted but never implemented. And when we determined that, we needed to, do something about implementation. We worked with DENREC and talked to DENREC. Our initial discussion was, in particular, about the area that is bayward of the canal. Our initial discussion was, could we simply exempt that area because it does not support the aquifer that provides our drinking water. DENREC's position is that the state law, it requires the protection of the water resources and the groundwater, and is not specific to only drinking water, and that it was important that we have an ordinance that applies entirely. So we developed a draft ordinance at the staff level. It went to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission assigned it to a subcommittee. Then they referred an ordinance to Mayor and City Council. Back in May, there was, at the public hearing, a significant amount of opposition to that. So at this point, there's a moratorium in place that stays the application of the ordinance as it's currently written, that is in effect until it's corrected or until March. So hopefully we don't have to extend it again. And at the staff level, we took the comments that we heard from the public, in particular the concern that 20% impervious cover, especially in an already platted area where the lots are 5,000 square feet, is not realistic. So the ordinance that we have tonight is based on that. We sent it to DENREC, and we do have some comments from DENREC, and there is, the main comment that we have from DENREC is on page 3 of the ordinance, lines 95 through 97. They suggested that we not remove that language. So that's the main comment that we've received from DENREC. But what we've done here is we've said to deal with the issue of all of these lots on Lewes Beach that are already platted and are very small and 20% becomes unworkable, we added a section that deals with applicability. So we say the impervious cover as it relates to major subdivisions and site development plans in excess of 1 acre. And for that, it keeps the same language as the 20% impervious cover for that. So again, if you've got a large site that you're working with, it's the excellent recharge area often doesn't take up the entirety of the site, and it's much easier to plan how you do the impervious cover and where you put the impervious cover on a larger site. It's very difficult on a small lot. So then what we did is added language, a section called small lot development, and said for development of lots of 1 acre or less, all walkways, driveways, decks, and other paved surface must be comprised of pervious materials. So it's still the lot coverage that the zone allows. So the R3 zone and the R3H zone allow for 65% impervious cover, but it says that your walkways, your driveways need to be a pervious material. The other thing that this then does is it defines pervious material for the purposes of this section so that we can make sure, that we're all talking the same thing. We also made some changes to the intent because all through the intent, it talked over and over about drinking water supplies. And when we talked to DENREC and said, but this doesn't support any drinking water systems, they were very clear that it applied and that the law was not only about drinking water. So we added, we took out where it strictly referred to drinking water and replaced it with water resources and, groundwater quality and quantity, because that's consistent with the state law.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Okay, so tonight we are here, hopefully everyone has had a chance. This draft with the comments and the sections that Anne Marie referred to in her presentation have been online. I would judge from that perhaps some of you have had a chance to look at it, and we will. I would start off by telling you that we're here to have a public hearing tonight. However, we're going to give a good public comment period at the end of this meeting, and we do not anticipate this will be on the December agenda. It will not appear on the agenda until January at the earliest, and that's January 10th. I anticipate right now that we will keep the public record open until December 30th. So there's adequate time for anyone wishing to make public comment in written form, because our attendance here this evening is somewhat small. I think we only, I think you said we only have 7 people online, is that correct?
8 now.
8, okay. And we have 8 in the room, so I anticipate that there may be a lot more people who would like to make comment about this. So we'll keep the record open, give everyone plenty of time to make comment. So I would like to open the floor to those of you here in the room first, and then we'll get to those people online, okay? Rick, you were the first one, so please come up. I think you're familiar with what you need to do.
Thank you. Rick Quill, 407 East Market Street. Blue Water House Bed and Breakfast, 203 Savannah Road, the corner across from the Dairy Queen. I wasn't going to speak, and I hope I can be as concise as possible. I became aware of this ordinance about now almost 2 years ago. And I'm not going to rehash what happened in the past. I'm making a commitment that I can't change that. But I can tell you that I have spoken to the governor's office during my concern about this ordinance that was being applied to our particular lot. Ernie Lopez, the state senator, extensive conversations with DENREC. We submitted a report from Steve Cahill, a geological engineer from Duffield Associates, a very reputable firm, who counters, and it's on file. I've given it to the Planning Commission and the Mayor and Council in this office, and that was done last spring of 2000, whenever, many months ago. No one would ever convince me that this particular swap ordinance has any merit whatsoever. I'm speaking from a layman's person point of view. The wells were capped. If you're moving the goalpost away from source water to now all water, that's a moving of the goalpost. The intent of this ordinance originated up in Newcastle County, and originated to protect all the wellheads for potable water and drinking water. Very noble, and it was done by the Delaware Geological Surveying Society. They surveyed the whole state, and they did it equitably to determine what grounds were sandy soil, excellent recharge. And indeed, we do. We have excellent recharge on a big portion of Lewes Beach. That being said in 1945, I believe, or 55, I believe it's 45, our wells were capped on Lewes Beach because of what? Contamination. Rising sea level, even back then. They moved all our wells right now, I believe, and if I'm not speaking correctly, I would like to be, because I love to learn, I love to be taught. All our wells, by the way, the name of the aquifer that this well had protected is called the Columbia, and it's called an unconfined aquifer. And that means the aquifer is close to the surface of our to be replenished, and that means more so around that area, contaminants from, like if there's development on roadways or agricultural, that is what's can contaminate it. There is no way in God's green earth that one drop of water that comes on Lewes Beach can even make it. By the way, the slope, it slopes upward. Then you have the bay, the canal, and the ocean. Again, I'm not going to give you a detail because it's all in that report. And as far as DENREC is concerned, it's poppycock. It's absolute poppycock. Because I heard the same thing. That was one of the most agitating and annoying thing to me was they point to you guys, it's on your books, and you guys pointed to DENREC. And then DENREC points to you guys, and then you point to DENREC. It got to be maddening. And maddening. If it was relevant, I'd be the first to say, I'm in. In my development proposal, we're going to, if it goes through on a couple of sites at the beach, I'm all for to be a part of the community, to compromise. But there is no way in the world, and I'll give you an instance. In a meeting, when this council, a few people weren't on it, were discussing a moratorium, one of the questions, and you can go back into your council records in the Zoom, somebody asked the city solicitor, since we didn't enforce this, all these years. What is our legal jeopardy? And if I'm misquoting, I apologize. But I believe the city solicitor said, don't worry about it. Nobody else has enforced it. DENREC's position has always been when they talk to me, the town of Lewes has jurisdiction over the town of Lewes. Yes, in 2005, they did. They had this groundswell of an inertia of protecting our wells. It's all to be applauded. By the way, there are exceptions in excellently charged areas throughout the state. Not many, but there are, I believe they comment on one up in Dover, like in a brownfield or some other areas. I submit to you tonight, and again, I'm not angry because I want to maintain some civility on this. But to me, there is absolutely no science, nobody from DENREC will tell you that the main part of this, when it was adopted, was to protect our groundwater. And now we're moving over to water. What difference does it make? Do you know that since 1945, our sea levels have risen? If you can go back to the Alaska Avenue, which Mr. O'Donnell made a presentation back in May 18th on Alaska Avenue, our water underneath this particular Alaska Avenue and large portions of the beach area, not all the portions, is only 18 to 20 inches below sea level, below surface. You got to convince me where it wouldn't make a difference. You're not protecting anything. And as far as DENREC is concerned what are they going to do? That's my point. What are they going to do?
Thank you, Rick. Anyone else in the room care to speak? Come on up, Dennis.
Dennis Reardon, 1302 Bay Avenue. Anne Marie, you took all my steam away with your explanation, because I read this differently than you did in part, but thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. Rick also covered a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I agree with him that looking at the state law and what DENREC, and somebody imposed this on this area, and the area is from Cape Henlopen State Park, and it continues down towards Roosevelt Inlet to Kentucky Avenue, which is about halfway between Savannah Road and the inlet. I don't think there are any lots of 1 acre or more. So we're only talking about the smaller lots that we all have on the beach. And so my recommendation was going to be that, based on the fact that we all agree there is no drinking water to be protected, the wellheads have been capped, and in all likelihood they're contaminated because the wellheads are under the saltwater marsh, also the wastewater treatment plant. So I don't know how they couldn't be contaminated by now. So there really isn't any potential drinking water on the canal side of the bay side of the canal. So again, reiterating what Rick says, what are we doing? What's the purpose of this? And why are we restricting some of the areas? Now, Anne Marie says if your lot is less than 1 acre, you can still meet the code requirements. But in this ordinance, it also gives a definition of pervious surface materials, which is very restrictive. It excludes things like stones, crushed shells, and they're pervious surfaces. And there are pervious surfaces throughout the city. No one has come up with, I know Anne Marie disagrees with me on the crushed shells, but there's nothing, you look it up, talk to the people that sell this stuff, to them it's all pervious. My neighbor just put in a bunch of stones in his driveway. They're pervious. There's no water accumulation there at all. So I think that since we don't have anything to protect, we shouldn't impose the definition of pervious surface that's in this proposed ordinance. And we really need to go back to the drawing board and we should extend the moratorium on this proposed ordinance. There have been at least 3 drafts that I have seen. There could be more. None of these drafts included input from anyone that's impacted by this. So I think it would be, my recommendation is that we have some gathering where the participants include the people that are impacted by this and really take a good hard look at what we can do. When you look at the, as it was explained, the water that we get is from the Columbia Aquifer and all the recharge area around there. I challenge you to take a look at the county ordinance on the protection of that area. It's like non-existent. There are words there, but there's no real protection in there. So as Rick said, what's the penalty for doing something that is not as restrictive as what these proposed ordinances say, particularly the impervious surface? And I think others will speak to the impossibility of getting an impervious deck, that type of thing. Thank you.
I think you meant pervious deck, not
Pervious, yeah. I always get that confused.
I know. That's okay.
And I'm not the only one.
It's, you know, you're not alone.
Yeah, I know. There are a lot of people.
All right.
But I really just need to go back to the drawing board.
Okay, thanks, Dennis.
You're
Harvey
welcome.
can address the issue of perviousness and
I was
depth.
going to ask him, yeah.
I mean, just they can be built with greater spacing between the planks that provides more pervious. It's done in many coastal communities. Ocean City has some.
Well, if we don't have any drinking water to protect, you know, you have groundwater. They're saying you're protecting groundwater. What protection is afforded in the ground? What is it for? Why are we protecting groundwater? Scott Andrews, in a presentation to the Board of Public Works on February 23rd, I listened to it, and he was talking about the weight of the water and the salt water being different and everything. And at the end of his presentation, Tom Panetta asked him if there was any chance of saltwater intrusion towards the Columbia Aquifer. And without hesitation, he said, the canal will protect any intrusion of water from the base side of the canal going further inland. And then he went on to add that the real threat to the Columbia Aquifer is from the surface water, saltwater surface water of Canary Creek. With storm surge and sea level rise, that's the real threat to the Columbia Aquifer. So again, why are we making a mountain out of a molehill here that is really going to impact people's property rights?
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Nick, you look like you're ready to speak.
Nick Carter, 1510 Bay Avenue, where I grew up. And so I had a chance to review the draft ordinance. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things. It refers back to, I think in the third paragraph, it refers back to the Delaware Code. And I went and looked through the Delaware Code to try to find a couple of things that relate to this. And a couple of things that came up. In the research, I also discovered Article 17, which is in the Lewes Code, which is the Source Water Protection and Overlay District. And in that document, there is the first paragraph, 197, 92. Right, it talks about environmental constraints to protect public drinking water resources from contamination and pollution, and to ensure the groundwater quality are adequately protected. And it goes on to talk about new construction, redevelopment, or expansion of existing buildings. And when I went back to the revised ordinance and the small lots section, all it says is for development of lots of 1 acre or less. So I don't know what that word encompasses. Is that a new construction, redevelopment? Is that remodeling? And then if you remodel a house, do you have to go back and change your driveway and your sidewalks because you're getting a permit from the city? So I think it's very vague at this point. And along that line, I'm looking along Lewes Beach on the bay side of the canal, and I'm trying to determine how many vacant lots there are. There are not many.
Not many.
And if you look at the plot, and I don't know if you all saw the plot, I'm sure you have, but it also incorporates Cape Shores. And we have some representatives here from Cape Shores too, and I'm not sure how many vacant lots there are in Cape Shores either, but when it comes to the development of these vacant lots, if there are more than 20 or 25, I have to say I don't think that this is going to make a significant difference, especially when you look at the plot, and this large portion here is all saltwater marsh. It's Cape Henlopen State Park.
That's right.
So the only sections that would be this Cape Shores area and half of Lewes Beach, and if there are 25 vacant lots, I'd be surprised to build. So that's why I think, again, I will say that I propose that you scratch this ordinance and you redirect your energies to something a little bit more important. And you know where I'm going with this, is the wastewater treatment facility, which lies over the recharge area. And I know this is not the place and time to talk about it, but it really is, because it contaminates the water source. If we have a spill like we had in 19 or another one we just had, it's going to contaminate the water source. So I think that there's a big elephant in this room, and I think we need to take the cover off the elephant and really address the important issue here, is how to protect the citizens of Lewes. And I think that's the most important thing, in my humble opinion. So I think you need to redirect your energies and look at something more serious.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're aware that the BPW is working on ways to have a study done. And,
I hope so.
And ways, and I think we've talked about that a few times.
There's one other thing, and I just want to finish up. It says in this Article 17, if you read the definitions, it's Section 197-93, it talks about contamination, which includes sanitary sewage.
Right.
It also includes a definition of hazardous waste, which is solid waste or combination of solid waste, which may cause potential hazard to human health. And then it goes on to say, in the Section 197-96, excellent groundwater recharge potential area, item E, wastewater treatment and disposal systems. Quote, such systems shall not be permitted in an excellent groundwater recharge potential area. And we have one. That's in the city code.
Got it.
I quoted that from the city code.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Kevin, Kevin's already risen. Is that, are you okay? No, go ahead. Janice? Okay, come on, Janice, you're on.
Good evening, Janice Eric, 415 East Cape Shores Drive in Cape Shores. I'm the president of the Cape Shores Homeowners Association. We may be coming a little late to this particular party. We haven't had an opportunity to actually survey our members on their reaction to these ordinances. Once the moratorium was in place, certainly the interest in the community certainly died down for a while, but I don't think it's going to stay there. To answer one question or one bit of data, Cape Shores is a 220 lot development. Of those 220 lots, only 6 remain to be built on. So that's less than 3%. The rest of our area is dedicated open lands. We already try to be good stewards of the environment. We don't have any lawns in Cape Shores. That limits the amount of fertilizer that's used throughout the community. We try to restrain invasive plants. In other words, we're trying to do our best to keep our area as beautiful as it is and as it was given to us. Okay. And we're very appreciative because all of our lots are less than an acre. The 65% coverage, at least for the footprint of the house, would cover us. But to the extent we're talking about pervious materials for our driveways, for walkways, and possibly for roads, which our roads are private, we would want to find out more about the impact of this particular regulation, should we need to repave our roads at some point. They are now almost 30 years old, and it's our sole responsibility to pay for that because they are private. Having said they are private, they are also quasi-public in the sense that we do currently have an understanding with DENREC on beach replenishment, and that understanding has been in place since 2008. And that understanding is that we both mark our roads as available for parking by the public so that they can access our beach. Now, because our lots are so small, that means that our mailboxes and our trash enclosures severely limit the number of parking spaces available on our streets to members of the public. So this past year, we've tried to address that by enforcing some rules, encouraging all of our owners to park on their driveways and in fact stack their cars on the driveway, because during the rental season, a number of our houses are rented out, and we want to keep those cars off the streets if we can to provide some public parking so that we can fulfill the requirements with DENREC. So those are my points. We're sort of devil in deep blue sea in trying to comply with competing interests of everyone. And any application of these regulations to Cape Shores are going to have a de minimis, helpful, beneficial impact, because there's hardly any space left to be developed.
Great.
So that's my very narrow point, and thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Janice.
In this ordinance, stones would count as impervious material, correct? So the absence of lawns
Not
that-
for landscaping,
Is that-
because the issue with the stones is, well, I'm gonna let Charlie, because he's the actual engineer. So I'm just telling about action and that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're just asking for an engineered system to make sure that it is pervious and it will handle certain storms and it will percolate into the ground. You know, I don't necessarily agree with the comment that stones are pervious all the time. We've all been on stones that have been packed down in hard pan, and that happens oftentimes in driveways. What we're asking for the new, in this ordinance, for new development is an engineered system so that we know that it is pervious.
Okay. Janice, by any chance, do you know how much open space, acreage-wise, you have in Cape Shores?
I couldn't even hazard a guess.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question mainly of Glenn, or try to answer a question, but I need to look at Glenn because I could be wrong. The way I would look at it with their private roads, there's nothing that says that you need to reduce impervious cover where it exists.
Right.
So redoing the roads would not be affected because that's how we look at that as an existing condition. So, I mean, that's consistent with,
And I can hear Glenn's response.
No, she's correct. I mean, it's kind of a classic, in some ways, a classic non-conforming, an existing non-conforming situation, and then normal repairs to those sorts of things are not required to come into compliance with the new regulation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room care to speak? Kevin, it's your turn. Thank you for waiting.
No. Mayor Becker, Deputy Mayor Williams, members of the council, my name is Kevin McGinnis. I live at 1108 Bay Avenue. I am a full-time resident of the city of Lewes and a voter. I wasn't quite sure of the procedure here this evening.
can you pull the mic to you?
Just pull it down.
I wasn't quite sure of the procedure here this evening, so instead I thought I was hoping to ask questions. I don't know if you'll answer, but I really hope you do.
Okay.
This doesn't go to the broad policy here. It goes to actually some of the discussion we were just having. When I looked at the proposal, and other lawyers who were involved with us looked at the proposal, it appears that section E1B mandates that all development of properties of 1 acre or less, every walkway, driveway, deck, and other paved surface must be comprised of pervious concrete, porous asphalt, permeable pavers, or other forms of pervious or porous paving material. Now, I'm not sure if that was totally written the way it was intended, but it sounds like it's saying that every walkway, no matter the size, every driveway, no matter the size, and every deck must be comprised of one of the approved forms of paving material. Is that correct?
I think that's the way it was written.
That's correct. That's based on the definition, yeah.
Okay, good. So could you explain what is meant by development in the proposed standard? We just heard two somewhat competing definitions, that development is only new development. The proposal just says development. So does development apply to new construction, renovations, maintenance, or some other form of activity on the property?
So when you're looking at these types of exterior things, it would be, development would be additional development. So if you are removing a house and building a new house, if you're removing a driveway and replacing it, but it does not require that you remove anything that's there just because you're renovating a house.
But if you're renovating a house, looking at other current procedures and provisions on the books, you have to bring your house into compliance. So would this be one of the new standards that you would have to bring your house into compliance with?
I think it goes back to needing to, depending on the renovation and the extent of it, looking at the section that Glenn mentioned before, that of the ordinance that deals with nonconformities and tells you how to deal with nonconformities.
Well, there's a nonconformity section, and then there is a separate section, the 50% cap section.
But that's the floodplain, so that's entirely separate.
So this requirement would not be required of anyone who is maintaining or renovating their home.
Right.
It would not apply, or would it apply, if you tore down the home and built a new one?
If you tore down and built new, yes, it
Okay.
would.
Good, thank you. The definition also says that the system that you're putting in must include an aggregate base that provides structural support and acts as a stormwater reservoir. I believe it goes on to say that it must be an engineered system based upon the local geotechnical conditions that shall be reviewed by the city engineer. Again, this would apply to all walkways, all driveways, and all decks.
On new development, or replacement.
I'm just asking. I'm just asking. So there are some decks here in this area that are built out of wood or built out of composite materials. Under this definition, wood is not included. It says the deck must be built out of one of the approved pervious things, which all seem to reference paved materials. Again, I don't know if this was
I can clarify that for you.
But if I can just finish, Charlie, if I have the courtesy, thank you. I just think if that's not the intent, I think the language should be clarified.
Okay.
Because if you read the language, that's what it says.
Gotcha. I think you're right.
Thank you. The same is true with another often found item here, which are stones or pavers. They're normally in sand. They're stepping stones to a house. So if you're using something like that, I'm pretty sure that a stepping stone is not porous. Stepping stone is not pervious. I don't even think it's paving materials. If this proposal is approved, could you have stepping stones in a new house as you do currently today? It doesn't seem, again, to meet the definition in the proposal.
I think I'd like to give that some thought. Stepping stones, yeah, I haven't thought too much about that, I guess.
Well, I appreciate you giving it some thought, because
Yeah,
that's what we're trying to just
Right.
clarify
Yeah.
what's covered and not. And to that, could you explain, if you're using stepping stones, how you develop with the stormwater reservoir and provide structural support and storm water reservoir for every walkway.
It would seem that that would require a lot more definition, so I get your point, okay?
And that all of these have to be reviewed by the city engineer. Is there a process for how that review will be conducted, a cost estimate?
These are good questions, thank you.
Thank you. Just have one last one.
Sure.
Could you share the number of properties that you believe will be impacted by this proposal, or could be impacted by this proposal, if it is enacted?
I don't think we could today.
Yeah, I don't think we have that. I mean, what I would say is, at this point, with what's on the books, there's a lot more impacted than what this would have. But, I mean, we can look at that in GIS.
And it would be impossible to come up with a definitive, exact definitive number, because you can't, it would be hard to define when a house might be torn down. That would
I
trigger-
specifically use the word property,
Right.
not the house, the
Okay.
property. So that if you're selling a house, you would then be able to inform the potential buyer
Okay,
of the rules that would apply.
okay,
One would think that in the future, that might be good information to have.
sure.
I
Okay.
think disclosure is something they talk about in the resiliency committee. It's probably something
Well,
to
that's where
add
we are.
to
We're
it.
talking about
Yeah.
disclosure statements. That could be included in that, yeah, exactly.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, anyone else in the room? Rick, let's give everybody else a chance to speak first. Anyone else? Now, let's see where we are with Zoom, and then we'll come back to you, Rick, before we close, okay? Yes, would you please either type your question into the chat or raise your hand so we can bring you into the meeting? I don't see any hands yet.
There's no hands.
Give it another minute here.
There's no hands.
So, Anne-Marie, are you saying with these, if they're meeting these pervious material, they can operate within the existing grid,
Yes,
including commercial?
yes.
We have one, okay. Cole Flickinger. Bring him into the conversation here. Cole, if you want to.
Can you all hear me?
We can hear you, we just can't see you.
Yeah, at some reason I have not figured out how to turn my camera on.
Okay, well, we'd like to see you, but that's okay. We'll work
With
with
the
you.
webinar format on Zoom, I'm not sure why.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you, Mayor and Council, for holding this public hearing. And I just wanted to kind of echo some of the things that Kevin was talking about earlier. And Dennis, with respect to definitions of pervious materials. And sorry I couldn't be there tonight. We were back in Wilmington, but we had a great weekend in Lewes this weekend for the Christmas parade, and it was fantastic. Anyway, the definition of pervious material is something that I think needs further discussion and input. The way that we read it, pervious materials, pervious concrete, porous asphalt, permeable pavers, and other forms of pervious or porous paving material intended to allow passage of water through the pavement section. It often includes aggregate base that provides structural support and acts as a stormwater reservoir. The permeable paving must be an engineered system based on the geotechnical conditions and shall be reviewed and approved by the city engineer. And I think that seems very subjective, approved by the city engineer. I think we really need to have items that are permitted versus being so subjective. I mean, we could submit something and it may or may not get approved. But I think too, this excludes, I don't know if it's intentional, stone material and clamshell, crushed shell material. And I feel like Charlie said earlier on the call, we've all seen driveways that get compacted and water doesn't run through them. And I think my statement for the mayor and council is not all stone is created equal. And in the engineering world, if you look at crusher run or graded aggregate base course, you know, PennDOT 2A modified or 3A modified stone, 2B stone, DelDOT and PennDOT and Maryland DOT, they've all designed stones with a gradation of stone. And a gradation of stone means various shapes and sizes of stone that go into a stone mix, you know, PennDOT 2A modified, and it's very specifically crushed and passed through certain screens as required so that when you compact that stone, it meshes together like a very tight matrix and provides almost a concrete-like base that would be installed under an asphalt pavement, right? So if you're talking about crusher run or graded at aggregate base course, I agree. When you take that stone that was designed to knead together and mesh together very intentionally, water may not pass through it. If you take a river stone, like the stone driveway we have at 903 Cedar, those stones are round and vary in shape, so they will never mesh together tightly. They're not rigid and sharp in shape and size. They're round because it's a washed gravel. So there will always be voids between those stones, no matter how many times you drive through it. So when anyone that wants to come by our property and walk in the driveway or drive a car in the driveway, it's very loud. I can be in the house with the windows closed and someone pulls in the driveway and I know they're there. The reason I know they're there is because the stone moves under the tires every time a car pulls in. Why does it move? Because it never tightens up. There's always voids between the individual stones and pebbles. Well, if you always have voids there, then the water can always get through. So the point is, not all stone is created equal. Charlie knows this, he's an engineer. Certain stone mixtures were deliberately designed by ASHTO to tighten up and mesh together. Other stone was deliberately designed to allow water to pass through it. And that's why when you put a French drain around your house and bury it, or in the BMPs that is being recommended by DENREC, you backfill around a perforated under drain or pipe with round river stone. The reason you do that is because water can always get through it. Or if you take a number 57 stone like ASHTO 3/4 stone, that stone is all the same size and it will never actually tighten up entirely, like a crusher run would. So what I'd like to say to the mayor and council is we need to provide some materials, some stone materials that are acceptable. And I would argue they are going to always pass and allow more water to infiltrate than pervious asphalt pavement. Or if you did a paver system, a concrete or brick paver where water can get through the grout joints, I would argue that a Riverstone driveway, such as what we have at 903 Cedar, will always allow more water to infiltrate than one of these hardscape systems that allow a limited amount of water to infiltrate. I mean, Charlie, do you agree with that not all stone is created equal?
Yes, certainly, yes, certainly. Which is, you know, part of the reason why we have it in there that it has to be reviewed and approved by the city is for the exact reason that you're stating, that everything's not equal. So, you know, certain driveway stones, whether it's clamshell or gravel or otherwise, like you're talking about, they have different gradations. They have fines in them that make them tighten up when they get wet and when they're driven upon. So, yeah, certainly I agree with what you're saying. So I've written down a comment to look into your discussion about, you know, whether there's certain stones that may meet the requirements for, you know, permeability and pervious material. I know that when we design a pervious asphalt system, permeable asphalt system, porous asphalt, it has those kinds of stones that you're talking about directly underneath it. So I think it's a good point and one that we ought to look into.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, sir. And so beyond that, I would love to see some more study on that. But I also think too, in this definition, it says provide structural support and acts as an aggregate base that provides structural support and acts as a stormwater reservoir. And I think there's some really cool YouTube videos out there actually that I've been watching to see how the pervious asphalt works. And I think that 100% makes sense. You've got to provide that water, that reservoir under the porous hard systems, hard pavement systems. In certain cases where you have like a clay-y soil and you'd have to do like a water infiltration or almost like a perk test to see how water infiltrates the soil under the area that you're putting pervious asphalt on. And what that reservoir does is if the soil can only take a certain amount of water per time, you need to essentially create a volume of space to retain that water for a period of time that allows the water that's in the reservoir to then infiltrate into the virgin subsoil that is below the pavement. And so the argument here is in Lewes, we have sandy soil. It's not clay-y. And I think before we put something in there, that reservoir, it may not be applicable to Lewes Beach because the virgin subsoil in Lewes percolates to a point that you don't really need to create that storage to allow that slower release in a soil that might be more clayey and not allow infiltration to take place so quickly. So that's another point I wanted to raise. And, you know, it all comes back to, and I don't want to reiterate the letters that I wrote and sent to Mayor and Council in March, the end of March of 2021, and the second letter around May 5th, I think it was, maybe in 2021. But the groundwater table on Lewes Beach is such that it is so shallow. And if you dig a hole in your yard in Lewes, down 2.5 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, depending on where you are, it will fill in with water on a day where we haven't had rain for a week. And you dig that hole, it will fill in with water, no different than if you're on the beach building a sandcastle and you dig a hole deep enough, it just fills with water. And so that water goes up and down daily with the tide. And to the point that folks that have buried propane tanks out on Lewes Beach, they put concrete hold downs so that when your propane tank gets empty or half empty, it's not going to float up out of the ground. So I think the overall point of we've decided we're not protecting the local wellheads for Lewes, but I think what I heard early on in some of the DENREC arguments as to why we need to maximize the infiltration on the beach is to keep fresh water going down into the ground, and that's going to keep salt water from further infiltrating beyond where it already has. And I think the trouble there is it's already basically 2 feet below the surface, 3 feet below the surface. So we're going to have rainy days here and there. The rain's going to run off into people's yards or into sandy areas. It's going to infiltrate through the sand, and it's literally going to go down 2 to 3 feet and find its way into the existing groundwater table, which is 2 to 3 feet below surface. So I raised the question of, is there any groundwater monitoring wells on Lewes Beach where DENREC's been studying the actual condition on Lewes Beach? Does the groundwater table fluctuate daily with tide? Is there salinity in that groundwater already? I think I asked that question in that kind of Q&A that we had in mid-March of 2021. And the answer was no, there are not any groundwater monitoring wells on Lewes Beach. Somebody cited one over by the old Public Works, and I'm sure that's an environmental groundwater monitoring well for environmental reasons, but not to study just the behavior and the salinity of the groundwater and the groundwater table. So something else I would argue before we go down, trying to better the groundwater situation here and the groundwater quality, we probably should have some groundwater monitoring wells to understand what we're dealing with. That's pretty much the only comments that I have, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Cole. Appreciate your thoughtful comments. Do we have anybody else? Looks like no one else has raised their hand. Do we have anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, Rick, I think you wanted to speak again.
Thank you. Rick Quill, 407 East Market Street. You could have dropped the mic between all the previous people, forget me. But it goes to the point is, it's great we're having an open, honest discussion. I think a very transparent one. And I'm delighted by that. But in the societal pact, there's people who are willing as members of the community to contribute, even if it's a cost benefit to them. But I can tell you for me, I am not willing to contribute when it doesn't provide any benefit. And I think what Cole and everybody just said, I came in about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, to a meeting that was on suppression systems. And I came in to throw daggers and grenades because I'm saying I'm tired of government regulation. I'm tired of adding costs, strategic costs. And Carolyn said one thing, and she said, if it saved one life, and my argument melted away because I'm willing to do that. I don't know what I'm going to do in the future, but I'm willing to absorb that cost. When we talk about infiltration systems and being engineered, I'm like, oh my God, how many more layers? And I always suggest, and I'll leave you with this, I would encourage everybody on the whatever, in this room or on Zoom, Google Earth. Google Earth 203 East Savannah, Google Earth 209 East Savannah, and just look at the acres and acres and acres and acres of forests, land, whether it's wetlands or whatever. There are thousands and thousands and thousands. We're blessed to have that. We have a finite amount of land to be developed or will be developed, but we have it seems like an infinite amount of open space. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Anyone else in the room care to comment? Okay. If there are no further comments, and there's nothing further in the chat, I think we're good here. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to keep the record open until December 30th, and we don't expect this will appear on a city council meeting prior to our January 10th meeting of '22. So if there's nothing further, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. I thank you all for taking time to come out tonight, and hope you're enjoying the holiday season. Thank you very much. Make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Carolyn, do you want to do a second?
I'll second.
Okay, good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all again.
Thank you. Yeah, it happens, you know?